What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show, I have 4 guests. They are 4 out of 35 contributors to the coming up virtual collaboration campus. So stay tuned to listen to my conversations with Yannis Angelis, Tanja Murphy-Ilibasic, Tina Meckel-Wille, and Mary Alice Arthur. And we are talking about how to make virtual conversations work. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand, lean back, enjoy the show, and visit workshops.work to download mine. Thank you for listening. Hello, Tanya.
Hello, Miriam. It's such a pleasure to be on the call with you.
Yes, I'm looking forward to hear more about your virtual facilitation skills.
Yes.
I could witness some of them where you hosted a meeting with 35 people on a call. And I was totally in awe how you kept the spirit and the structure and the overview and the timekeeping. So wonderful job you did.
Thank you so much. I'm quite touched. As you know yourself, I'm sure, it doesn't always feel like that in a session like this, considering we'd never really met before.
That's true. Yeah, the monkey mind is always present.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what have you learned from your times as translator for your facilitation?
That words have different meanings. Words create worlds. And I'm actually now quoting Judith E. Glaser, who was the person who created the whole coaching methodology of conversational intelligence. And a key part of this is the importance of language, the importance of words, and understanding that people's assumptions of what you're saying can differ so greatly. So both of you are nodding your heads and smiling, but you may have 2 entirely different understandings of the situation. And this is what attracted me so much also to conversational intelligence, because of my experience from my first exposure to the corporate world, I'd say.
So how do you apply conversational intelligence then to a workshop space or to a group conversation?
So conversational intelligence, it's based on neuroscience and very much understanding the impact that you're having on other people, the impact they are having on you, and how to regulate this. So to understand that, for instance, something that somebody's saying to you, you're actually translating as some form of threat, or it's intimidating you, making you feel unsure, uncertain, and that is greatly impacting your ability to react. So basically, it's your more primitive brain that's going to be reacting here to protect yourself.
Because we hear something in the words of the other that trigger our fears. So basically,
Indeed.
we reflect our own thinking and feeling on the other person.
Exactly, and this could actually be the case, but it may not have been the case at all, and your counterpart simply had, from your perspective, a poor choice of words that triggered this reaction in you, but their intentions are entirely good.
And I can imagine that this is even more tricky when we move conversations to the virtual world, where we miss the clues from body language, for instance.
Indeed. I mean, it astounds me daily how many organizations run conferences the entire day remotely with no video.
I had a conversation about that with a client this morning. Exactly.
It leaves me speechless. I really do wonder, what on earth can you say to people to help them understand why on earth would I reduce my conversation to a voice with nothing else? You have no idea what a pause means. Is somebody thinking? Are they doing their emails? Are they struggling to communicate in a foreign language and can't think of the word? I have no indication of this at all.
True, and it can trigger so much anxiety, because if I think, oh, this other person just kept silence because they feel attacked or whatsoever, or they zone out, they're not interested. This can trigger a lot of anxiety, discomfort, and then derail actually the conversation.
Well, exactly. It's derailing you immediately because you're back into this position of feeling threatened or unable to cope with the situation. So your ability to cope with the situation is impacted and restricted. Your language, you can't think of what to say. You know, normally everybody knows this situation. You've had an unpleasant encounter of some description. And afterwards, you're thinking, why didn't I say this? And why didn't I say that? Yes, because you weren't physically in a position to say that, because your emotions were overriding all of the other abilities, and your prefrontal cortex, it's like your executive brain, was basically shutting down. Because the signals from your body are, survive this, we have to survive, what are we going to do to survive? And this is where your focus is going. You're not at your best analytical self or able to analyze information, quickly process it, and follow others. So this whole conversational intelligence is helping you understand how this can work better, and that everything is based on trust. And I think that this was one of the very easy things in our conversation with the 35 other members of the team that I was facilitating. These people innately bring trust into a call of this sort. So for me, from that perspective, it wasn't a case that we had to build a great deal of trust, because we simply have, some of us knew each other a little bit, but we all know the type of person that we are. So we bring that trust into the conversation, and then people are not so quick to jump to misunderstandings or misinterpret something, and will just not feel impacted.
Yeah, and if we don't understand or feel triggered, we have the reflex to just ask the question whether we understood it correctly.
Indeed, but you ask it in a non-confrontational way as well. And your assumption is, so there's another, this is one of the things I also like. Judith she very sadly passed away shortly after I actually finished my own certification. So that was very sad indeed. But she had a way of coining phrases such as words create worlds, intention versus impact. So as long as your intention is good, the impact of what you do will be good. But sometimes you really need to question, what was my intention in saying that? Did I want to make someone feel awkward? Did I want to make them feel uncomfortable and as if they had been ignoring me? Was that my intention?
That asks for a lot of self-awareness and maturity.
It does, but the self-awareness grows when somebody simply points it out to you. Then you start asking yourself these questions, and it impacts everything. It impacts all of your communication with others. I said it was a methodology, but I personally don't feel that this does Judith's work justice, because it's a way of being. It's a way of interacting with others and understanding. Also, if you feel that something is triggering you, or you're being challenged in some way in a conversation, that you're aware that this is happening to you. And that awareness alone gives you the power to do something about it.
Yeah. Do you have, coming from conversational intelligence, do you have something like a favorite exercise that you like to apply for a group to help them understand the power of words?
So there's a very nice little exercise. It's really simple. One of the topics within conversational intelligence is that conversations are broken up into 3 different categories, 1, 2, and 3. And now, in a really sort of basic way, conversation 1 is where the input is very one-directional. Now, sometimes this is good. If you have somebody who has no experience and is learning something, then it's got to be one-directional communication. Conversations at level 2 are often quite confrontational, because I have my opinion, you have your opinion, and neither of us is actually prepared to listen in a way that allows me to maybe reprocess and reanalyze why I have this opinion, and even question whether maybe there's an even better way of doing it. So this level 2 conversation is when neither party is open to compromise. And the level 3 is then that we really are, well, what about this and how about that? You know it yourself. And also in our call of 35, this was exactly what we did. Yes, we co-created. That's what we call co-creation. So as an exercise, what we do, people stand opposite each other, they hold their hands up, and they push the palms of their hands together. Now, to illustrate a level 1 conversation, I, as the person imparting knowledge, have the power. That means I push the other person's hands down towards them, okay, because I am imparting the power. Now, when you're in level 2, people put the palms of their hands together and both of them push, and you're going nowhere. Now, with level 3, you have the palms of your hands together, and it's a very smooth, guided back and forth. Your hands are moving everywhere, but you're following each other. You're going back and forth with each other. You're in the flow together.
And then it's like a dance.
It is indeed. That's right. And that's how it feels. It's such a great feeling. And what I often do in workshops or in groups is when you have that impression that people are being very adamant about their opinions, is you ask them to simply, we do this exercise at the beginning of the day so everyone's aware of it, and then I ask them to show me what type of conversation are they having. Show me without words.
Oh, beautiful.
And then they simply, because everybody realizes it, you immediately realize it, and then they realize it themselves, and that is the first step to changing it.
Wonderful.
Tina, thank you for joining me. And in our pre-conversation, we talked a little bit about face-to-face meetings, and I would like to just jump into this conversation because I thought that was fascinating what you had to say. And maybe you can share with us what your thought process when someone tells you, oh, it's so sad that we cannot have face-to-face meetings at the moment because of the corona lockdown.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. So basically, I've been really passionate about virtual collaboration for a few years now. And I think one of the challenges that I've encountered is that people have a very narrow image in their mind about what virtual collaboration is, and I think sometimes the language is part of that. So when people hear webinar, I think most people have the association of I'm listening to people talking over slides, and things like that. So then often I try to be a bit provocative when people say, let's meet face to face. And I'm always like, let's have a Zoom call. We can be face to face.
Yeah.
Because I really experienced that. Yeah, if you have good tools and you start getting into the mode of being relaxed about it, you can really be face to face. And then they say, yeah, okay, we'll have the in-presence workshop. And then I say, well, I hope we're also present in our virtual workshops. So it's a really interesting conversation. I mean, also for myself to think about what is actually the difference and how do we actually describe that?
Yeah. And to come back to the webinar example, because I think that's a brilliant one. And unfortunately, most of the webinars that I have witnessed are indeed just a voice over slides. So what is it, according to you, that makes the difference between just a boring, I talk over slides versus a virtual conversation?
Well, perhaps first thing off, I had an interesting conversation in a workshop this week with other people about that, where a lot of people were pointing out, well, there can be some value in showing slides and having a talk over slides thing. So there is a place for that, especially, if people perhaps don't have video or it's technical information, etc. I think my point is that it's a very limited perception of what we can do. And so I'm on a bit of a mission to inspire people to say we can do so much more. We can connect in a deep way. I've been in calls with people, where I felt the tears were coming because we were in small groups, for example. No? So if you have like a technology that allows people to be in a large group, let's say of 30 people, but then also get together in pairs and you have a really personal question and you can exchange with somebody who's on the other side of the world. And I've experienced intimacy, I've experienced humor, all of that, which I think, when people, if it's just sort of in a very set setting, or of course in a corporate context, people often have this idea of like, okay, agenda, we just sort of zoom through the agenda, then you don't show that. But I also work with artists, who are doing like an artist project in collaboration with some Syrian artists. And, there's so much you can do. I could go on forever. Perhaps just one thing I think is interesting that we often sort of think like, if we're visualizing or doing things that they all have to be electronic. But actually, if you have camera, you can actually combine the camera with something analog.
So that you would write on a Post-it note, for instance, and show it to the camera.
Absolutely. Yeah. You could, you can visualize it in an electronic whiteboard, but you can also say to everyone, okay, so let's now draw something. And, people might think, well, that's just fun and games, but you can also do it like you would do in a normal workshop related to your work. So now let's draw your project as a vehicle or something like that. No? Or you can move, you can do things. Say, pick something that's on your desk that represents whatever, how you feel about the project now. Yeah. So you see, I could go on forever.
That's beautiful. And I would like to come back to this intimacy that you described. I recall that you just mentioned that you work with Syrian people and that you work a lot with remote participants that actually cannot come into the same geographical space because of insecurity. So how do you create this safe space where vulnerable, deep, and intimate conversation actually can take place through the screen?
Yeah. I mean, so that's the thing. The one thing is like, how do you do it yourself, but also like, working with teams. So basically, I sometimes work with teams where, for example, half the team has been evacuated from a security situation. So I've worked with people from Afghanistan, South Sudan, lots of different places. And interestingly, actually, the setup is always different. So one of the best Skype connections I've had was with people in Afghanistan. It's just like absolute high bandwidth, super brilliant. And then in other places, it doesn't work. But the point that we get to is that we have to sort of actually invest in the personal side of things. Mm-hmm. And let's say, when I'm facilitating a workshop, that's easier for me to do because I already have this role, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like I'm the singer and the dancer, and I can invite people to say, okay, let's now have a round of, how are you actually going today? And you always have to have a look and see what's what people feel comfortable with in the culture. No? Mm-hmm. And also the language. I had a fun thing actually where I used this, which is quite common in the Anglo term, is saying, how are you here today? Mm-hmm. Which is a bit like, how do you feel? But it's also, how are you here? It could sort of invite saying, hey, I'm really stressed about what's going to happen tomorrow. So, but in this round, it was so nice. It was in Southeast Asia. People all started actually saying how they got to the place and what travel they
motorcycle.
Yeah, and it was actually, and I first I thought, oh no, they've misunderstood the question. And then it was really beautiful because it brought in the personal context. Uh-huh. So it's a really nice example of actually inviting that in. So mm-hmm. when we're together in virtual settings, we miss stuff, right? Yeah. We miss touching each other, which to my mind is not a drama, but we miss also other contexts. So anything you can do, it can be simple things. Some mm-hmm. people don't like it if it's too advanced. It can be things like just saying, what's the weather like today? And you can use, for example, the time when people are getting onto calls, and you're waiting for everyone to actually be there. Start engaging with people. Write to them in the chat. What is in front of your window when you look outside? Share photos. Anything. What did you do on the weekend? Yeah. So especially for teams who are working together all the time. And so when I work with teams who are really set up, I really try to emphasize that. And this is interesting because in many cultures, that's not really an issue. But let's say in the Northwestern cultures, you have to emphasize to managers that this is important. And it's not only important in order to be a nice human being, it's important for your work to work. This is the kit that we have in, amongst us humans. Mm. And this is the kind of information you get when you walk down the corridor. So, this is really, invest 5 minutes in a check-in round. How is everyone going? Where are you at? And that will give you, whatever is important to you, performance and efficiency later down the track.
Yeah. And what you just mentioned about the manager and walking down the corridor reminds me of a call that I had earlier today with a client. And the last group call we had was without video. Most of them didn't have the video on. So I suggested, okay, please, let's make a rule that everyone needs to be on video. And then the answer was like, well, most of us feel uncomfortable revealing our personal setting and not being seen with our ties and our costumes, literally. Because this is how everybody sees us in the normal professional context. And I thought it's a missed opportunity, actually, because it can actually give us the opportunity to lift the professional connection on the next level and to connect on a more human side.
But it really depends on the cultures, no?
Yes.
So it's a difficult one. No? I think whenever you can, absolutely use video, because you have so much more of the signals, as we all know, facial expressions, etc., are so important. But yeah, of course, I think depending on the cultures, and some people, I mean, personally, I also feel like that I would like to have a nice, cleared up background and not have my children's bedroom or so, because it does convey something. And I think in many parts of the world, people don't have a lot of space. In Asia, people often have small flats. So sometimes it can really be just something personal that they don't want to share. I mean, there's technical solutions for that as well, but, but it's an interesting thing. And I think, and sometimes it's also about just giving people advance notice. No? So, for example, with Muslim cultures, that the ladies, make sure that they have their headscarf on, which they might not have on at home. So it's just it can be a bit overwhelming if you say, hey, let's do it right away. But I would definitely encourage people to do it, because often people initially say they don't want to because they think their hair's not nice or so. But it really is such a benefit.
Yeah.
So I would always try to push it a little bit.
And I would like to underline what you just said, that the background also does convey something. Because you're right. If I would sit in a messy apartment, this triggers something kind of without judging. It's not good or bad, but this automatically happens. If I see your messy background, then I will somehow have the stamp unprofessional in my mind, or personal space. And this might change the entire flow of the meeting then. That's true.
Yeah. And I think it depends on who you work with. No? Yeah. I mean, I work a lot also with colleagues on video calls, and there I really enjoy it. I take them with my laptop to the coffee machine. No? So I'm literally in my kitchen. I'll just put it on the stove. Hey, how are you going? And for some people who are new to that, they're going, wow, this is so nice. Yeah. We're really like connecting personally. And then I say, okay, I just need to get something from the living room. So I'll walk around with them. But yeah, in a different context, that's different. But you know what I think is interesting? It's just something I've come to last week. You can buy like a green screen and then project things on the background. The tool Microsoft Teams also has blurring. And in Zoom, you can actually buy photos that they will put as a background. But you know what? Just my personal feeling I've had in the last week is that somehow that also can make it quite artificial.
Yeah.
Like you always see that it's, you have this perfect photo behind you. And I watched a really interesting video the other day about somebody who's quite good with lighting. And he was also using like private little, not like professional computer lamps, but let's say like something you would have in the living room. And he was showing how it would look different and how he would make his room look different. And he had a fireplace there and books, etc. And for me, it was quite interesting because I'd always had this assumption of, it's good to just have a white background. So what I've done in the past, I mean, now it's different, but in the past, I had a cupboard behind me and I actually put large flip chart papers on it, just to not distract. But now I'm sort of thinking, especially because we're now in this situation of, everyone working remotely, and because of Corona also, I think people are feeling really isolated. Yeah. So I think anything that can help sort of connect and make it more human can be very nice.
Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. And maybe if you find the link for the lightning person, I would love to put it in the show notes. Do you have a favorite exercise that you do in your virtual workshops?
Well, I guess it always sort of depends on what you want to do, no? But what I like just for showing people what's possible is basically sort of a combination of, so in Germany, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, there's this game activity. So it's basically a combination of explaining terms by either using words or drawing them, or actually playing them. So in English, they call it charades, no? Or like pantomime. And just to show people that that's also possible, and so I just enjoy that. And I can, I often also then, if people sort of think, oh, this is too silly. So recently I had a workshop that was with people working on solar industry. So I took some fun things like, because it was in India, I took like Gandhi and Angela Merkel, but I also took things like photovoltaic panel or things that they'd use throughout the workshop, smart cities or so. And it's just so much fun. So you could just have it as a random thing where people, just one person explains it and then whoever guesses it gets a point. That's the simplest. Or the more advanced version is where you have two teams playing against each other. But that sort of depends on how much time you want to spend on that.
That's so funny. And maybe as a final question, just because I cannot let go yet, according to you, what makes a virtual workshop fail?
Well, I think I guess I don't know about fail, but it's definitely a shame when it's not relaxed. Yeah. So I even experienced that, because I'm also participating in projects where I'm not facilitating, but we're developing some leadership program or something. And I even experienced that when the people who are hosting the meeting and they just go into it and say, okay, bam, this is the agenda, who says what, and especially if I'm just on a call and I'm like the service provider and they're from the company, I also find it difficult to sort of say, can we do a check-in, please? How you start a workshop really lays the feel and the tone for the rest. And when they've already started like that and they're racing through, nobody even says hello and it's bam, 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 it's really difficult. And that's even for someone like me who's used to being self-confident. But you can imagine what it does with other people. They might actually not say anything. So this is one of the key things that we always say is that there's research actually saying that also now it's interesting, I was going to say in physical meetings, in residential meetings, let's call them like that if everyone had the chance at the beginning of the meeting to say something, and even if they just say, I'm fine, it increases the likelihood of them saying something later on.
Yes.
No?
Yeah.
So for a virtual meeting, that is the absolute, you should really, really, really do that. And I guess the other thing is which is totally normal and I have full empathy, but let's say that's some of the weird competencies that we have to develop in this disrupted world is to what they call dance in the moment. So, the likelihood of having technology challenges, I would say, just from my experience, is at least 30%, right? If not more. Yeah. And that's really stressful, no? Because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't have control. It could be problems in your street. It could be the last update of your computer. It just freaks us out, which is why, by the way, I think you should always work together, never alone. But yeah, that's where people sort of say, if you learn to sort of go, okay, so the colleague just dropped out. Oops, the PowerPoint's not working. Oh, we lost half the participants. But to not let that tension sort of, spread to the rest of the group and just sort of say, okay, we're learning live, right? This is what happens. And people, of course, they react to, as a facilitator, you do have sort of an effect on the room. So I think if you can sort of try to sort of stay relaxed, even if inside you're like going, oh my God, that is definitely helpful. So those are two examples of just people feeling good.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and experience with us. And I'm excited to seeing you at the virtual campus.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Miriam.
Thank you, Tina.
Do you ever feel you're tired of the trip from home to the home office? That the physical confines of your house are not getting you the exposure to the new ideas that you need? Maybe you need Mastermind. At Mastermind, you work together with a group of peers who help you bring new perspectives to your challenges, to find new solutions, and who you can even give a little bit back to by helping them solve their problems. In a compressed 2 hours, you'll get a day's worth of learning. So why don't you get out of that box and come to Mastermind? workshops.work/mastermind.
Mary Alice, I was so happy to find you back in the group of 35 who are now setting up. You have a big role in setting up this virtual campus to share facilitation skills that are needed at the moment. And when I think of you as a facilitator, I think of the art of hosting and being a warm host and a very structured person at the same time. So I would be curious to hear from you how we can bring the mentality of the art of hosting and specifically this campfire conversation into the virtual world.
These might sound like two opposite things, that idea of sitting around a campfire and that kind of warm feeling you have about being with others and being in close physical proximity to being online. And I wondered about that myself too when I first came into contact with it. I've been very fortunate to work with Amy Lenzo, who's absolutely just a wonder in this space. Her whole thing is about how do you create really safe and almost sacred space in cyberspace, which I love as an idea.
Sacred space in cyberspace.
Yeah, two things here are,
wonderful.
How do we use some of the tools of facilitation to help people step in and deeply listen to each other? So in the art of hosting, we most often have check-in and check-out as a way of helping people to step into a group fully and also then be complete at the end. Often people come to meetings anywhere you would name, and lots of places I've worked where they're rushing from the last meeting. It's like their body arrives, but their whole brain takes about 10 minutes later to finally show up when they're going to go, what? What have we been doing? So a check-in actually helps people to be present. That's one thing to learn, that if we just launch into the task, then we actually haven't aligned ourselves to purpose and why we're here and brought our whole energy and presence and focus to something. So it's a paradoxical thing that you need to go slow to go fast. And that actually when you get into turbulence, and we're just beginning to learn this right now at the time of the C virus, that if we don't build the relational field, we won't be able to stay together so well in times of turbulence, doubt, despair, being in the not knowing together, like we don't know the answer, we don't know how this is going to unfold. So the best thing we can do is create a good relational field so people feel like they can stay together for long enough, get the good work done. And just a simple check-in is a very fast way to do that. And it's not that you have to pour out your heart for 20 minutes each. It might just be one word of how you're feeling right now as you step into this conversation. Or what's on top for you that you need to leave outside the door so that you can be fully present for what we're doing? Or why did you decide to join this call? What are you really most excited about? So if you work with me very often, I've been known to say every so often, framing is everything. So how you actually invite people to step into something will dramatically influence how they step in and what they're capable of giving to that conversation. And right now there's a lot of concern and worry. So it's a good idea. Maybe we express that for a moment and then we step into our work because we've let that go and we can let it sit at the door for a moment while we're present for something else. But the same is true at the end. People go, whoa, and then they just drop off or leave. It kind of frays. I call that the fraying effect. It's like the edge of a fabric that started to fall apart or unravel. Yeah. But if you can make a clean closure, like a checkout, how are you leaving this event? What are you taking away with you? What's excited you the most about our conversation? What have you learned in our time together? Then I make a close to that conversation and my presence is able to go on somewhere else and be helpful, not having it drift behind me of still the things we talked about that I didn't complete on. Yeah. So just those bookends are interesting. And then there's the other stuff you do in the middle to invite participation. And places like Zoom, I've discovered, are really great places for collective conversation because you can have people in breakout rooms. It's like going to a separate World Cafe table and having a conversation and then coming back. And the one other thing I'd like to add is that in Art of Hosting, it's properly called the Art of Hosting and Harvesting Conversations That Matter. So there's two things that are interesting in that phraseology. Number one is the concept of harvesting. So this is more than just making notes. It's actually about capturing the essence of what's there and offering it back to people in a way that they can actually say, oh yeah, that's what we decided. Oh, I understand what I have to do. I get where we're going next. I know what the next meeting is about. I can see the pathway and stay together to go forward. So I often notice when I move into new groups that I'm the person harvesting because it matters a lot to me. That there's clarity to move forward on and that people can easily see that and easily read it. And most often we're working collectively in a Google Doc together and we're actually kind of, okay, this is what we said, this is what we agreed, whatever. But the Art of Hosting also does one other thing differently than most people when they're designing what they're going to do. And that is, we design from the harvest. In other words, we think about, what do we actually want to come out of this conversation? Both tangibly and intangibly. In other words, tangibly, what do we want? What decisions need to be made? Mm-hmm. What things need to be produced? What outcomes are we looking for? Those are all tangible things. But every time you have a meeting, there's the intangible as well. How do I feel about it? How do I understand my role? Do I have the courage to step in and do something that might be unexpected? Can I put forward my idea and feel like other people are going to listen? Mm-hmm. So there's that paradoxical thing again about slow down to speed up. Don't just no like this. But okay, let's have a round where we're just commenting on the discussion we have. Is there anything else we've missed? I'm going to put the piece in the middle. Please speak to that.
It's wonderful what you're saying, and I have one very concrete question. Yeah. So especially on Zoom or in any conversation, we have those who just start blubbering, or in these situations who have the urge and the need to speak a lot.
Yes.
When we're in the physical room, it's easier, I would say, to control that through body language, through distance. How are you doing this in the virtual space on a Zoom call?
Well, we often use a talking piece anyway when we're in the room together. Mm-hmm. And again, that's about framing, right? It might be, okay, we're about to do our check-in. I want to invite a brief check-in, so no longer than a minute, about the time it would take you to breathe in, breathe out. And we're going to offer, here's one, talking piece in every situation. I'm going to offer a talking piece, so just imagine that this is going around the circle. So here's a stone that just says, today I am thankful. So I'm going to offer the talking piece to the middle. When you want to speak, would you please say, I pick up the piece? And when you're done, would you please say, I put the piece back? That way we know not to interrupt you. We know maybe you've paused because you're just collecting your thought for a moment, but we know not to jump in or over you because you're holding the piece. And until you say, I put the piece back, the rest of us are taking the talking piece as a listening piece. So in art of hosting practice, we use that. And I'm not used to being talked over. I'm not used to people interrupting each other. I'm not used to this, oh my goodness, what's going on? And we also pause for a moment before people speak so that they can collect themselves. Okay, I'm going to put this in the middle. Just ask us to pause for a moment. Okay, now. So part of our practice is not already knowing what we want to say, but listening deeply and then trying to sense into what do I now need to say in order to be present. And it takes some practice. People aren't used to doing that. But I think if anything, this virus is inviting us to think more deeply, listen more deeply, and be still a moment, because every act we take has consequences and sometimes very unexpected. So and that's my own personal practice as a facilitator. I think you get better being a facilitator or a host if you have your own personal practice of how do you stay centered. And part of that is learning how to be in the not knowing, just deeply attentive and curious, not afraid. But, I wonder what's going to happen. Oh, I'm sensing there's a lot of energy in this group. It's not that I need to move to fix it. But when I understand that it's there and I can be compassionate with it, then it tends to deal with itself. So my practice is, how do I create the container so people can show up, they can step in, they can step up, they can step out and do some good work in the world and feel uplifted while they're doing it, even if it's a very freaky time. The best thing right at the moment is that we stay together and encourage each other. Yeah. That's really helpful.
Thank you, Mary Alice.
You're welcome.
Inspiring as always.
I'm wishing you good conversations. This is a good time for it.
Thank you. Yanni, I'm so grateful that I got the chance to meet you through this network of 35 virtual facilitators. And we are currently, and you are very busy now, to put together this virtual conference, the Virtual Collaboration Campus. Yeah. And I would like to know, since it's a community of facilitators, since when are you calling yourself a facilitator, actually?
Since when I call myself as a facilitator? Wow, that's very interesting. since when I call myself as a facilitator to the outside world or also to my inner world?
Oh, that's an interesting aspect. Was it different?
Yeah. Let me tell you a story. So, I started working in for-profit farm organizations back in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, the word facilitator actually didn't exist in this kind of environment.
Mm.
When we had to organize, and I was part of this, a kind of a conference or a kind of a meeting with doctors, normally a person who was taking care, it was called a mediator.
Mm.
And it was always content, how can I say, a content expert,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that was the first, let's say, in that decade of around the 90s, the idea of being a facilitator inside corporations like big pharma companies. For me personally, the things changed the next decade when I started studying organizational development and organizational psychology, applied organizational psychology, from the Gestalt perspective. So I was studying to become a Gestalt organizational practitioner and coach. And Miriam, that was the first time, so something like 15 years ago, when the ideas of checking in, checking out when you have a meeting, the circle way, creating an awareness, holding the space.
Yeah.
So these are more or less practices and terminology that we used in our Gestalt practitioner trainings. And I started getting familiar with this kind of work, and I said, wow, it fits so much to my mentality, to my character. And I started experiencing that because it was part of my training to become a consultant or a trainer. Not again the idea about a facilitator. So the facilitator identity landed in me something around 10 years ago, starting the decade when I started getting in contact with the heavy story work. Starting meeting people, that they were doing exceptional story work in the world, starting implementing storytelling, story listening, all these kind of, I wouldn't call them tools, but I would call them, mindsets, and let's call them also methodologies in my personal work. And then I started meeting these amazing people. I can tell 2 names on whose shoulders I'm standing on, and this is Marialis Sathu, this is Shenesvart, that they do amazing story work. And then I got more into this facilitation mode. Now the last years also through the art of hosting, in the hosting, let's say, mentality. So yeah, I hope I answered your question. So it was a long trip from being a mediator to becoming a facilitator and a host.
So what did you learn from being a mediator that you apply now to your facilitation?
At that time, it was like, oh my God, I'm exposed. So, the first thing was like, oh, I'm on the stage. Okay, I mean, I had experience with stage because I'm also an artist. So at that time, I was playing a little bit of guitar, I was doing a little bit of theater. But, in front of an audience, which was more or less, the very well shaped ties and people that they are coming from their academic ivory tower, it was a kind of difficult. So I think I just what I learned from there, it's okay, just starting feeling a little bit of confidence. It's okay to be a mediator. And yeah. And today it's still good. I have a kind of confidence on stage or inside the circle or in the periphery of a circle as well.
And when you say stage, how would you translate the stage in the virtual space?
In terms of space, I couldn't really find a metaphor at the moment. But in terms of attitude, I would call it like a presence, right? So presence and holding the space for what it is to happen in the virtual space. And by you as a facilitator being presence, I think it opens also the field for creating a safe environment, creating a trustful environment, trustful environment for people that they join to really being guided in a way, also in terms of virtual tools and virtual way of being there, and also in terms of content. So this is how I see that at the moment.
And maybe I'm making this up, but when I hear guidance and I think of your superpower with telling, as you briefly introduced, to what extent can you use storytelling to really guide the group, which might be even more necessary now in the time where we have to meet and collaborate in the virtual?
To which extent? You mean in the virtual space?
How do you use storytelling to guide the group?
Well, it's not guiding actually, but what I would say is that 100% I can use story. And the thing is that I also recall what Mary Alice says, that story is the human operation system. Which means that either you are in a physical space, either you are in a virtual space, stories about you. We all have stories, all right? Sometimes we are in a state that, just to tell you, when I work with people and we come into the place of how can we share our stories, the first thing that people say is, oh, I don't have a good story. Or, I don't know how to tell a story. So, and this is actually when we're talking about guidance. So you actually take the people by the hand and say, okay, let's see, how can you articulate the story now? Or maybe the existing story you have, how can you say it in a better way? And these are all kind of small practices and things that you are guiding people. For me, the most important, how can I say, aspect of the story work, as we call it, is the story listening. And that's where much of my work is, because for me, it is such an important thing of how we listen to stories. For me, actually, story listening is one of the easiest ways to open the path towards the deep listening, as we say. Whatever, we have a lot of adjectives now that we put in front of listening. So I'm very much interested, and I use a lot of times in my work, story listening, small tricks and methodologies to guide people through this path.
I think one of the biggest challenges in having workshops online is focus. Because when we're sitting in a space, we have some new things around us, we have new inspiration. But for now, I'm sitting in my kitchen and I know that for the next few weeks, this will be everything I get. So the inspiration that I need is really coming from the screen and from the other people. And I can imagine that storytelling is a beautiful tool to actually make workshops work. So how do you use this tool or your superpower to do that? Liabsolutely. I mean, you're right. Story is the thing. I have a kind of allergy when I hear the word tool for story, because for me, story is a life stand. So it's it's the way you see the world. But I mean, story requires and at the same time engenders presence. And when you're present, like when you're telling a story and when you're listening a story, what I've experienced is that you get in a flow. You name it focus, but at the time that you are getting in a flow, is this thing that actually you're losing time, and you're losing also the feeling of space. So then probably the idea of we have a virtual or a physical space, it's not so much figural at that time. It becomes background. What becomes figural is the story itself and how it is communicated between the storyteller and the story listener. And in this, yes, there are several ways that you can, and several, let's call them methodologies or tools, that you can address to people, and you can really teach them how to really become a better listener or also a better storyteller. And one thing, for example, is that, the way a person listens to a story, it can drag a better story from the storyteller. The way I'm listening to your story, I'm influencing you in the here and now, your story to just get better articulated and come out from you in the here and now. So if someone wants to become a better story listener, especially in the online world now, what would be your advice to them? Should I keep a secret for the workshop? Because it's related to the workshop I'm offering. Please, it's going to be a nugget. Yeah. So there's several ways that we can listen to stories. The one that I like best is the one that a lot of us story workers use as a metaphor, the metaphor of the grandchild. So how does a grandchild listens to the grandmother when the grandmother tells a story? If I can make a gesture on the screen, it will be like that. Yannis is currently putting his nose into the screen and looking kind of amazed, drawn into. So it's like, since we have a podcast, it's like half open mouth, wide open eyes. It's like, it's this full immersion.
Dive deep into what you're listening. This can happen also online, and we give some small directions, like try to make your environment like being more. It's better to have an environment which is very quiet. Try to avoid any distractions. Make sure that you're listening good. All your devices are okay. The same way as for the storyteller. Be focused. So it can happen as it happens, as I say, as it happens in the physical space. It can easily happen in the virtual space because it's the way that the story affects you as a story listener, also as a storyteller. It's because you are wired to that. So if the story is good, you can definitely, even virtually, even physically, you can definitely be immersed into that and listen beautifully.
Wonderful. To you, what makes workshops fail?
Several reasons. And I've experienced almost all of them, or most of them. One is, for example, for me, the most important, losing being present. So the second thing is preparing an agenda and trying to follow it 100%. Lately, it never happens to me. The other is I have experienced people coming from a stance of superiority. I'm the expert. I come here to teach you something, to tell you something. I think at least the way I feel the workshops, and at least the workshops I would like to be part of, they are more or less, how can I say, inspired by the circle ways of the equality. And me as a facilitator, I'm part of the tribe that follows the workshop. So I'm equally part of the team. I may say a few things more, but still from the place of equality. Also, we don't take care of the conditions. If we're talking about physical, we don't take care about, the light, the temperature, we don't do any proper check-in. There's so many things about, so many reasons for a workshop to fail.
Wonderful. The final question, describe the experience of being in this network of 35 facilitators in one word. What would come to your mind?
New learning.
Wonderful. We put it in a hashtag, so it's one word.
Yes, it's one word. New learning, one word.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to talking to me and for sharing.
Thank you, Miriam, for your powerful questions and for your warmness in this interview. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.